Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Her Excellency the Governor's press conference for the 23rd of March. We have an hour for the press conference. As is normal, Her Excellency will make some opening remarks on current issues, and then we will open the floor to questions, as is standard format now. We'll invite each journalist to ask one question, and one question only in the first round, and then open it up for supplementaries after that. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I have a bit of a cough, so if I interrupt myself with coughing, please excuse me. It's great to see you. Hopefully there will be others joining us. Actually, today was intended to be a joint press conference, and the Premier and I had planned it that way. But of course, other things intervened, and the schedule of the legislature today made that impossible. But we will be scheduling a joint conference sometime as soon as it's possible, hopefully before the end of April. So this is actually like a regular governor's press conference today. And I think some of you will recall this is my second press conference in the new year in 2016. I guess it's still a new year. We're still in the first quarter. And it's turning out to be an extremely busy year. You'll also know that this is my fourth press conference since I arrived last year, over 7 months ago. So I place a lot of emphasis on being able to dialogue with the media and making myself available to do that. So this is all part of that. So you're all very welcome. Let me start off by just recapping the five main themes that I've just always recapped in these conferences, and are the five main things that I'm working on. They are: how can we better ensure that Montserratians get the quality of service they deserve from the public service? How do we turn the corner from recovery to success on Montserrat's road to self-sufficiency? How can we make Montserrat a safer place to live, to work, and to visit? How can we better protect the young and the vulnerable from neglect and exploitation? How can we better develop the huge potential of Montserrat while preserving its beauty and environment? So let me start out today by noting a few items before opening things up to questions on these and any other topics that you might raise. First, could we just pause a moment to remember Sir George Martin, who has been such a significant part of Montserrat, as well as such a huge influence on world music. I know that it is the intention to organize a significant memorial for him here in Montserrat in the coming months. So rest in peace, Sir George. I also want to focus our attention for a moment on the violent events in Brussels over the last several days. I think the news media has been full of information about what's been happening there. And I also want to note the continued violence in northern Nigeria, where the group Boko Haram continues to wreak havoc with communities there. I was listening to a BBC article this week where people were talking about what it's like to live every day under the threat of violence, the continuous threat of violence, and having no safety in their lives. And I really have to reflect on what a blessing it is to live in a peaceful and safe place. And despite our relative distance from these tragic events, we must remain alert to potential threats from worldwide terrorism, and we cannot be complacent. As we move into the hurricane season, we need to focus on these kinds of threats that we face here and be ready for them. In addition to hurricanes and tropical storms, we're also mindful of other issues, such as the spread of the Zika virus, earthquakes in the region, and so on. And I'd like to give Tony a few minutes to discuss these briefly and just give us a little bit of an update of where we are on disaster preparedness and crisis management.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Okay, I just want to touch on six broad areas and just one or two comments on each. Firstly, on the Brussels attacks. The latest information we have is that 34 people have been killed and over 250 people injured. And our understanding is that 4 of those people are British nationals, injured rather than killed. But in terms of what it means for us here, I don't think anywhere now in the world is immune from the threat of terrorism, even in a small place like Montserrat. So yesterday we asked the Royal Montserrat Police Service and the Integrated Border Security Unit to review border security arrangements to ensure that they were proper and in place and robust. However, let me stress that there is no cause for alarm, but we cannot afford to be complacent in this day and age. Secondly, in the earthquake at the weekend, there's been a lot of media coverage and a lot of social media commentary on it. We recognise that it was 6 on the Richter scale, which in the scheme of things is not a massive event. Put into context, the Japan earthquake of 2011 was 9 on the Richter scale, was roughly 100 times stronger than this one. Fortunately, no tsunami was generated, and had there been, we believe that Montserrat would have had about 30 minutes notice to respond. In which sense the timing was rather uncanny, because last week there was a Caribbean-wide regional exercise on tsunamis in which Montserrat participated. It actually took place on St. Patrick's Day, when 2 or 3 members of the DMCA were actually fielding that exercise, but we did do a tabletop to prepare for it on the 16th, the day before. And the actions coming out of that have been identified to inform the development of a tsunami plan, with the aim that Montserrat will be tsunami ready in the foreseeable future. The sinkhole, it's worth just mentioning that we commend the MVO, the DMCA and others for the action taken to make the area safer in the last few weeks, and weather has hampered work to complete that, but it should be completed soon. I understand that the MVO plan to make a public presentation on their findings at the sinkhole in the next week or so, so that'll be more from the MVO. Governor mentioned Zika. As of today, there are still no reports of any cases of Zika in Montserrat, but I think everywhere in the region is phrasing this in terms of it's only a matter of time. We understand that cases have been reported recently in Dominica, Cuba and Jamaica, and previously before that in St. Martin. So the number of cases is building in the region. So local work to prevent Zika continues. Nurses have been trained to identify the symptoms of Zika, and area cleanups under environmental health are continuing. In terms of general disaster preparedness and the state of readiness, the Director of DMCA is in the process of drafting his annual report, which was required under the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act, on Montserrat's state of readiness for the range of hazards that it faces, and this is required by the 31st of March and will be considered by NDPRAC thereafter. And finally, just a heads up that within the next 6 weeks, we will be receiving a revisit from the Royal Navy ship. HMS Mersey is a current ship in the Caribbean. It's of the same type as HMS Severn, which visited in February last year. So she'll be here within the next 6 weeks for 3 to 4 days, and we will announce those dates nearer the time. As I say, she's similar to HMS Severn, so she's an offshore patrol vessel with a crew of about 40, but because we're outside the hurricane season, there is no helicopter on board. So that's all from me for the moment. Thank you.
On the issue of child safeguarding, I'm very pleased to say that we have now have a children, it's called the Children Care and Adoption Bill, which is in its final draft stages and almost ready to go to the Legislative Assembly for reading. I have had a look at that act, or that bill, and it looks solid. Let the experts decide that, but particularly pleasing is the heightened attention to the children's position with regard to actions taken in their interest. We're also working very hard across agencies to set up a children's safeguarding board, which would be the organization or the mechanism that has the authority under the Act to ensure that the various agencies, and we shouldn't think that the only agency involved in this is social services. It really spans right across social services, the police, in some cases the prison, certainly health, certainly education, the prosecutor's office, and so on, the justice system. So that's really important to note, and also to realize that the whole system has to work in order for us to be effective in safeguarding children. I think everyone knows that this issue is very near and dear to me, to my heart, and I've been working very hard on trying to get all of these things in place. So hopefully with the establishment of the board and the Act, we should have mechanisms where we're able to respond much better systems-wide to matters affecting the safeguarding of children. I'm not going to say very much in my opening remarks about public sector reform at this point, except to say that I certainly hear the various issues that are raised within the public service itself, but also outside by the public with respect to the public service, and I hope to be announcing some initiatives to deal with aspects of this in the coming weeks. And then finally, like many of us, I was totally overwhelmed. This was my first St. Patrick's week or day, and I was just overwhelmed by the activities and the crowds and the enthusiasm. We had so many people, so many residents, so many visitors enjoying the events. And I understand it was the biggest and the best yet. I've just seen some figures about arrivals, despite all the difficulties, which are up from the same period in March last year to the period in March this year, about 50%. Now, we know that there are issues around access. Those have been discussed, and they certainly exist. I was asking for a meeting internally with government to just discuss where we were with those and all the problems that arose, and something obviously has to be done about this. So I know that the government is very keen to identify and apply the lessons so we can make next year better, but not just for St. Patrick's Day, although this was a kind of a whole combination of things with a lot of people wanting to come over and us having rough weather at the same time. But all year round, really, the whole access issue needs to be looked at. So finally, again, finally, we have the DFID representative, Martin Dawson, here, who will be pleased to answer any questions on the DFID program, including the just completed financial assistance mission. So let me end there, and we can go into a round of questioning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Your Excellency.
Morning.
My question initially was going to be on access, but I think I'll leave that one. In this area, we have three buildings, three beautiful government buildings, and they've been apparently completed for the last couple of months. You have the government headquarters, you have ZJB, and you have agriculture. Could you give us an update as to, how soon are these buildings going to be open so they could be utilized?
I think I'll turn to my colleague from DFID to answer that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel. Yes, you're quite right. Those buildings are complete, and certainly in the case of the agricultural building, that should be complete in the next few weeks. They're ready to move into. The issue that the government currently trying to resolve is regarding furniture for those items, because or for those buildings, I should say, they were not included in the original proposal and would never have been part of the original project. So that's the issue that the government is currently sorting out, and it's about furniture for those buildings.
Tony, you mentioned this, so I don't know if it will be you or the governor that will respond about the issue of national security. No one's being immune to terrorism, and you've asked border security to make arrangements. In the last press conference with the police, they did mention the challenge of the current vessel not being fit for purpose. Do we have a timeline on when we can expect a new vessel, and what other measures may be put in place for this?
Thank you, Narissa. That is a key question. It's been something that we've been very focused on. Just as a background, the vessel that we currently have, the Shamrock, is 14 years old. So in some ways, I think we could have done a lot more to plan for where the state that the vessel is in now. It's sort of inevitable that it would have had some major structural problems by now. I know that it had an overhaul a few years ago. And, you know, there is some discussion about whether, in fact, that vessel is an appropriate vessel for us, especially given the anticipation of more tourism, but also the whole issue of monitoring the safety of the exclusion zone. And responding to any kind of marine incidents and so on. So I take the point. I've had discussions with the police. I've had discussions in London. We know that the purchase of a new vessel is not contained in the I think it isn't in the capital part of the program yet. So we are looking at, first of all, short-term and longer-term solutions to this. In the short term, even if we had the money for a vessel, it would take us quite a while to purchase and train people to use a new vessel. So we need to find a short-term solution, and I've been discussing these with the police. In the longer term, there's no question that we need a new vessel. The upgrading of this vessel will continue to get more and more expensive. Right now, what we understand is that it will require quite a lot of even just to get to the problem, quite a lot of work to get to the problem, as you know, the hull, which is the hull presently. So I just want to say that I'm absolutely focused on this and very dedicated to trying to get the funds to get a new boat purchased. I can't say right now how successful I am being, but I will pursue this very vigorously. I am pursuing this very vigorously, and hopefully I'll have some good news in the next month or so when we find out if there are other sources of funding for this. So thanks for asking that question.
I discovered that we've had some 21 special constables in Montserrat as of September last year. And I just need to know what has been the need and what have they been doing? What special services have they been giving to us?
Mm-hmm. There are a variety of services that they've been giving to us, most of which we can't speak about because they are involved in ongoing investigations. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Tony.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that the investigations that are required external support, we're not just talking about UK support, but regional support, have been major and complex. And it's the Commission will be the first to admit that the Royal Montserrat Police Service does not have the required expertise to allow those investigations to be progressed. So the Commissioner requested external assistance under MOUs with the UK and with other Caribbean overseas territory police services. And those were met by those police services.
And what that does, it raises a question that I was going to come to, and it has to do, Your Excellency, you do have quite some good intentions or even good plans, but all of them seem to be locked into a common problem. Just like we need special services, assistance with certain things, it seems to me that it comes back to that question, Martin, comes back to that whole question of our lack of capacity. Because a lot of the things that you're saying is really coming down to not having the ability, if you like, to do the things that are necessary to get there. How I mean, is this something that is noticed, observed, and is anything being done about it?
Well, actually, you're spot on, I think, on that, and that issue has been identified. It's not only a lack of capacity. There is capacity in some areas, but I think some of our systems in either human resources or just our management systems in government are holding some of that back. And the other thing is we need to develop capacity. We need to recognize that as a result of the volcanic activity and the subsequent things that happened here, a lot of people left. And we are dealing with a smaller population and a smaller group of specialists or experienced people in government. And we have to shape what we do with the public service with that in mind. I think we have to be open to accepting assistance from other places as long as we make sure that that assistance leaves other people trained and ready to take those positions. And that's my view on the whole thing about external assistance. We do need it. There's no question about it. It's been identified all over the place in the public service. The police are one example. But we need to make sure that we have a program that incorporates the use of those specialists into the whole development of our own public service. And that is one of the things that I want to highlight in the work that I'm doing with the public service. That whole thing about succession planning and integrating the bringing in of specialists and the training packages and scholarship packages that we offer to people in that with a very clear objective to developing the public service.
Okay, sorry, could I give James?
That's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay. We're taking care of that, Tony.
They made an agreement.
Martin, one of the things that our predecessor governor was going to talk about, and he probably got too overwhelmed, he didn't in the end, was the very topic we're talking about. That Montserrat, if compared, for example, with St. Helena, who we like to use as a kind of a benchmark, if you like, was the lack of our access or acceptance to what they call them TCOs, technical corporation officers. And I note in almost every business case or any agreement that comes out from DFID, there's always been the offer of the service of these officers, and clearly we don't take them on. But the concern was, and it is something that she alluded to as well, is using and accepting and benefiting from these officers. Is there anything we can do to maybe change that process so that we have them rather than waiting for us to ask for them, because it seems like we never do?
Well, I think it's a philosophy and approach that we, obviously are advocating. As the governor said, it's how it's used that is quite the key. That we bring on the resource onto the island, but it's important that resource is adding value, but also then training people so that when they depart, they can take over the jobs that they've been working on. So I think we just need to change the mindset a little bit and see it as an advantage and not as a threat, I suppose, and just see it take it for the opportunity that arises from it, and not see it as a threat. And I think that's just going to come with the more of us talking about it and the more people engaging it, and also that we're able to demonstrate when people are on the island that they're doing what they should be doing and building the capacity before they depart.
Your Excellency Martin, I would like to get both of your sides, but I'd like to apologize for my late arrival.
That's okay.
It was really due to circumstances beyond my control. Yeah, but Martin, you touched on the point. Your Excellency would have alluded to it earlier about building the capacity on the ground. For years now, we've been hearing a lot of talk about capacity building and having the expertise coming from outside to assist. But there hasn't been much in terms of imparting that knowledge to locals on the ground or residents on the ground. And we've been hearing this talk over and over again, and very little has been done. And one of the things Your Excellency alluded to, a program that needs to be put in place. And my question is, how soon will we see this program being implemented?
Okay, you mean in terms of 4TCs in
Right.
particular?
Yes, yes.
I think we just need to agree a policy about it, which is part of the whole process of preparing the budget and so on. We need to have a policy about external assistance of that kind that is integrated with our policies about succession planning, about developing people. And I don't see that clearly articulated yet. As you know, I am, by the Constitution, the head of the public service, so I take that role and that responsibility very seriously. And you will see in the coming months that I'm quite actively engaged in some of these issues that you've mentioned, in working with the public service, in pushing forward, particularly in the area of human resources. Because the two key areas really, aside from public financial management, are human resources, management of human resources, and of course management of projects. And procurement being part of that. These are areas that it has been recognized that need a little bit of invigorating, let me put it that way. And I'm going to focus very much on HR because I think this is an area that is at the heart of the public service, and that if we can make some real changes, not just we need to make incremental changes, but we also need to make some transformative changes as well. So, it's not an easy thing just to say, well, we need to fix things, and then to go about fixing things. You have to think very carefully about how you engage, who you engage in that process, how you engage with it, how you engage the public service, the public, and other parts of society. So I'm actively looking at a way of doing that now. Go ahead.
Yes, certainly. And just to close on this point, I mean, we've provided and are continuing to provide financial resources to enable this to happen. So in the new financial aid settlement, we've ring-fenced part of the budget for technical cooperation. So once we've got the policies sorted out, there's the resources there to do that. And also, I think our approach within, as the Governor has mentioned, within our project delivery as well, we build in capacity for technical cooperation to bring in expertise on the island specifically for the projects concerned. So there's resources available across the whole spectrum for this area.
Yes, I need to ask a follow-up question to my first question before I go on to my second question.
Sure.
You mentioned that as far as the new buildings which are standing there unused around Braids, that there was no provision for furniture initially. I just need to find out, has the funding been allocated? Have the equipment been ordered? I'm concerned about all three buildings, but I'm particularly interested in Radio Montserrat. I think they're doing a fantastic job with the facilities that they have, but I am looking forward to seeing Radio Montserrat using the new building on the hill. Could you tell me, what is really happening? Is the furniture plus the whatever media equipment on the way?
Well, talking of ZJB in particular, I mean, that did come up in the FAM discussions as part of the requirements for the recurrent budget and also the capital budget within the FAM. I mean, essentially, now we've agreed the budget with the government, it's government's got to decide on the priorities. I mean, we talked along many issues and many priorities. The resources are there, but government's got to decide how it wants to use those resources now.
So that sounds like we're a pretty long way off. Okay. Question
Well, I
number
think it's probably a question you need to direct to the government rather than me.
I realise that.
Because we've talked many priorities and the government's got to decide how with the budget it's got, how it wants to
I
carve that up.
sincerely hope ZJB is a priority. But question number 2, geothermal. I've been in the Weekses area recently and I've seen, men at work. Could you give us an idea of how far we are with that third well? What's happening really?
Yes, I can. Thank you. And I was hoping I'd be able to say a lot more on this today, but unfortunately I can't. But I can give you some highlights. But if I may take this opportunity to say in a couple of weeks' time, I'd like to have a separate press conference, or at least announce through the press the update on the geothermal project and the plans for the future. Okay, so that'll be after Easter, after my holiday, if that's okay. But yes, we're at the approach now. The Minister of State has approved or agreed to the drilling supplying contract, which we hope to issue in the next week or so. Yes, you're quite right, Hazel. There's a lot of activity going on. We've secured the land in the St George's Hill area, and Public Works Department are actively engaged in the clearing of the land, ready for the drilling phase. There's also a number of tenders that the government has let, for example, water holding tanks, the drilling pad that needs to be established in the area, and also the dredging of Plymouth Port or Plymouth Dock, I should say, ready for the arrival of the ship carrying the equipment. So lots of activity going on, and certainly in 2 weeks' time I'll be able to announce who's been successful in getting the drilling contract, and also give more information on geothermal, not just the drilling phase, but also on the future plans as well.
It's important for us to demonstrate this capacity problem. See what Hazel said when she first asked the question and we spoke about the project being at the beginning. You actually said the project did not have the plan for furniture. That just simply amazes me. And it brings me then to the other situation, because it all evolves from this. Your Excellency, when you announced that we're going to have a discussion on the access issue with the government people, I think that for me is a mistake to start with, because I don't know what information they have, and for us to rely just on their information regarding what is taking place, again, I think there's a capacity gap in there, and so you're just going to be, how they call it? There's a phrase that we talk about, spinning top in mud. It's or trying to. That's even worse. So I would ask if there's any plan to include other agencies. There was something else that was mentioned about including all the. In fact, when you were talking about the child safeguarding, I was very glad to hear that you talked about all the different components and departments that really go into doing that, because I think there is a lack there of how to get really to it, because I have some grave disappointments regarding this child. I'm big, just like you, very, very, very keen on this child safeguarding thing. And so my question really is, with all of that, is there a consciousness, or is there a plan to really involve all the stakeholders or all the people possible to inform any discussion?
Well, I think that's a really, really good point, but you have to start somewhere. And so what I'm interested, it really is the government's responsibility. So what I'm interested in is bringing people together at that point and saying, what did we learn, what went well, what didn't go well, and then it's up to the government. I think there is an intention to broaden that discussion out. Obviously, it's a hot topic with everyone, people that are here and people that aren't here. And it's got, we've got to hear, there's a lot of public discussion about it, and we've got to hear that. But I would leave that to the government to decide, and perhaps in that discussion, that initial discussion we have, nudging, us towards what kind of a discussion do we want to have with the public on this?
Yes, indeed, there's been very little or none at all. For example, all the talk that one would have heard regarding the access situation and the numerous suggestions that people who have suffered from, if you like, the problems, that's just one part of the story.
Yeah.
For example, I know that it's not that we were not really prepared to deal with the problem that evolved from the high seas, because that's really where the only problem really was. Mm-hmm. After that problem, there were no real problems. Mm-hmm. There were 123. There were this number of people coming in, and they came in fine. I listened just this morning to one person complaining and trying to give their suggestions as to what should happen, really not saying anything. Because the problem then, which I don't think has ever been described, was that they were all set and ready to have Winair take up that situation, but Winair just wasn't ready for that problem. So that really caused a lot of problems. And so that's one more thing they have to add to the to the thing. But it's a little unfair, I think, for some of the complaints that do come with regards to what is happening, and even all the suggestions. They're really not necessary. So it's that kind of information that needs to come in to inform inform that situation. One of the questions I had was on your first goal, which was public service, but I think you spoke to that already. DMCA, the disaster situation and reports and so on. We've had 2 meetings which had to be cancelled, and that is the disaster media group. I have to think that this must be a very important part of the whole disaster DMCA program, and I'm not sure I understand what is happening.
Is that a question about the
could
end
you
of
sort of
back?
expand a bit more? Because Anesta sits on the disaster media group.
Yes.
And she too, I think, has been disappointed with some of the level of attendance and the engagement of that group. So just what is it you're really driving
Well, I'm
at?
trying to find out exactly what, I mean, I don't know what she can tell us, add to that. I know that one of the meetings had to be postponed, the last one anyhow, because she was unable to make that particular time for the meeting, and of course there wasn't enough time for us to set a new time. And the young lady who's in charge of, or who has the responsibility, it seems, to organize the meetings, she actually came out of vacation to have this meeting, which was a postponed meeting. And so I'm just asking if there's anything from, because really I think you through her chair that meeting.
I don't, and haven't so far anyway, attended any of those meetings, because that's Anesta's role. What I will say is that group is absolutely crucial in preparing for and handling any disaster, because you can't handle the media, especially the international press. I'm not thinking of this august group, because I think we're all on the same side here. Is that handling the international media? If you can't handle the media, you can't handle the crisis. So for me, having that group functioning and working and doing what it's supposed to is absolutely vital, and I know Anesta feels the same way. So it's something we'll discuss after this meeting.
Okay, you ready?
Yes. Martin, can I get some details on your new colleague that's supposed to be coming in to work on especially economic development in that area? After the FAM, has there been any money designated for small business development, things along that line?
Yes, I can. In fact, he's here. He's sitting just outside the conference room. His name's Hannes Barenberg, and he's the private sector advisor now, and will be with us for the next 18 months. As part of the FAM discussions, we were focusing initially on the tourism elements, and agreeing within the FAM what we could sort of assist government within the immediate term on some of the tourism product development work and generally keeping the sort of tourism aspects ticking over. Whilst Hannes is currently working on a business case that we're aiming to get approved towards the end of this summer. But as part of that business case, which is focusing not only on tourism but on the private sector development and small-scale enterprise area as well, we were just chatting before we came to this meeting about getting some design appraisal funds agreed, which I'm happy to do for him over the next few weeks, so we can do some pilot work initially, but leading on to the business case that will help us design the bigger business case. So certainly by the end of the summer, we'll have a much bigger plan and resources able to finance that as well.
Could you give us some more details on what is the thinking about how you would help private sector development?
Well, some of it will be obviously around tourism as a driving factor in there, but also small-scale enterprise, some of possibly having some sort of challenge fund arrangement, providing small grants to specific activities. But he's really the expert, so if you want to have a word with him and get him to give you some ideas now. But as I say, we're pretty much in the gestation period, so not nailing down specifics at the moment, but he's got some broad ideas, which I'm sure he'd be happy to share with you.
And I think, too, that if the Premier was here, he would have some things to say about that, because Martin is obviously, and Hannes are obviously working very closely with the Premier's office and other parts of government on the whole tourism policy. It does belong to government to make a decision on how it will go forward. So I'm sure that if we have a subsequent press conference, that the Premier will probably want to speak a little bit about the ideas that he has. And he has had some good discussions, I think, already with the new advisor. But remember that it's not DFID who's driving the policies and what kind of programs come out of it. They hold the budget. They're looking to the government to develop programs and proposals that are credible and consistent and all that sort of thing. But it really is up to the government to move forward on that.
Okay, so if he's working on the business case, that would mean that no funds have really been allocated yet for small business development within the new recurrent budget.
No, not on small business development, but we have on the tourism within the recurrent budget, and that's really just to tick us out or get us through the next sort of 3 or 4 months up into the summer period, and then the rest will be covered by this new project.
Martin, I noticed that the bias is on tourism. I'm keen to find out what's his terms of reference.
For Hannes?
Yes.
Well, he's a private sector, so we're not biased on tourism. It's just where we are at the moment as a result of the tourism consultancy work that's come on. And I think with the analysis within the economy is that tourism is going to play a significant driver in the economy here. I don't think you can ignore that. But he's much broader than that. It's very much about private sector development, economic growth, and all the bits around. All the areas
so what
around
are some
that.
of the other things that can run parallel? Should I put it that way?
Well, it would be, for example, as I say, small medium enterprise. So if there's the opportunities for entrepreneurship on the island, other factors, and it does also tie with some of the other economic growth areas that we're supporting. For example, if you think about the fibre optic link, what the opportunities that can generate from the internet and the world outside there and the World Wide Web, etc., etc. As I say, as the governor is quite correct. I mean, the strategy is being driven by the government. We're just here to facilitate that and then resource it. But if you want more details, I think it'd be great to talk about it when the Premier's here. But also, Hannes can give you some idea of the discussions he's already had.
Private sector development. That was all built in. Everything we're saying here was all built in the MDC framework, and it's functioning. Of course, that was one area that was just beginning this private sector development. Unfortunately, we really don't have any private sector. By that I mean there's supposed to be a Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Commerce. It's not functioning. I suspect I came back here in December with a mandate to get this going. I met with the UK chairman of Industry Chamber of Commerce, and had already sourced. In fact, it really started with this gentleman who had done a lot of work with Montserrat between 1998 and 2006-7, I think, who was willing to come back and work with us. Unfortunately, I've not been able to get anything going on the ground because of the terrible weakness of the organization. I would want to suggest, and I believe that the Premier, who was part of what took place up in London, really would be able to inform us as to where they're going, because much hinge on government saying, hey, you got to get going, you know. And so I'm happy to hear that we have somebody actually on the ground who is involved in this. And I'm wondering, has he made any effort to talk with, because you do have a committee, you have an executive and all of that, and that's part of the thing in coming up with his plans or whatever he's doing. Has he really met with anybody in there?
Yes, he has, and also has plans to meet with a variety of people from a whole range of areas. I mean, it's very much. Yeah, I think if I use the coin the slogan, which I think has been used before, Montserrat Open for Business, I think is very much also concentrating on the policy and the bureaucracy that's required. Again, it's another mindset change in making Montserrat an attractive place for people to come and invest. So he's engaging with Chamber of Commerce and all the other various associations that exist or have existed in the past. So he's out and about, spending most of his day talking to people and getting a feel for what's going on and where these sort of institutions and associations can assist and getting some ideas. So it's very much part of his process.
Okay, so we can look forward to having some statements from yourself, and hopefully
Yes.
that we would have this meeting with the Premier.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be quite a good link. And I noticed we have, as we came up here, we kept making reference to the government. So maybe we can have some things already that he can come prepared to deal with. So maybe we can pass those on to him, and he can come ready to deal with.
Mention was made of the child safety and the importance and the fact that right now we have ongoing the workshop. I was privileged to be a part of the session yesterday afternoon. I plan to be there tomorrow. There seems to be some mixed messages, however. Recently, we learned of a case which came through the Court of Appeal where a young man had his sentence reduced. And it seems to us, well, lots of folks who are talking, that there are mixed messages. Because rather than the victim and her, and in the case if there happens to be a male, their needs being considered, the legal fraternity seem to be more intent on looking at loopholes and how you could best, free people from getting the consequences of their actions. So I am just wondering, what is really going to happen if we're told yesterday, for instance, okay, whether you're in education, health, social services, the church, whatever, if you are aware of a situation, you need to report it. And we know that. But then when you report things and they go through the legal process, and the people are convicted, and then some lawyer who is very talented or the counsel, go and on a matter of, the loopholes and the law and what the magistrate or whoever did not put forward, reduce sentences or let people walk. I think it's frustrating to the general populace, and for those persons who would have gotten involved. Montserrat is a small place, and even if it's one, people's rights are important. So whether or not the legal person put forward their case properly, if somebody was hurt, if somebody was molested, they're going to live with the consequences. I mean, is there anything that anybody can do to make sure that everything works in the interest of victim as well as perpetrator?
Thank you very much for raising that. I can't comment on that particular court case, of course, but you've touched on something when you talk about the way the community is feeling and mixed messages that is a big worry of mine, and that is that whole issue of impunity, and the idea that that maybe has existed before, and that maybe exists now, because it's a very silencing concept. I think that the work that we're doing now to raise awareness in all parts of the system, including the judicial system, and we've got some further work to do in this area, it will begin to address some of those issues. I'm concerned, for example, one of the things that we don't have in Montserrat is legislation or a legal approach to dealing with sex offenders, say people who have been convicted, and because in other jurisdictions, this is an important part of the whole criminal and justice system in dealing with all the points along the way, the whole spectrum of safeguarding whoever the victim might be. So, I take your point very much to heart, and I'm glad you raised it, but I can't comment on any specific cases.
We have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah. Your Excellency, we are aware that you're unable to comment on the specific case that Hazel raised. The law will always be the law, and counsel will always do their battle in court. But in terms of strengthening the safeguarding mechanism, that was just an idea that was raised. In terms of strengthening that mechanism, I know that you've spoken about work that is being done. What do you think can be put in place to strengthen it from the safeguarding side? And let's not worry too much right now about the court.
Yes.
The safeguarding side.
Well, there are a number of things that have already been put forward. So you're looking at, sort of two aspects of it. One is to ensure that you have a system of child safeguarding. You will not be effective if you only have one part of the system that's beefed up or expertise is improved in. So during the budget discussions, certainly there are additional resources, certainly for social workers, because we do not have social workers with expertise in this area. So that will be coming in, and I think it'll be technical cooperation in the short term, so that we can beef up the ability here to deal with that. But it's right across the system. The police have asked, to be trained and able to work more closely with the social system. So you have those two parts of the system, the main parts of the system. One is the social part, and one is the criminal part. Those two areas, criminal and justice, those areas need to work much better together. So there are increased focuses in the budgets of the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, certainly social services, the police, the prosecutor's office, and so on, in increasing their own capability to deal with these things. And then there's the board that I talked about, which needs to have the authority to direct, in a sense, people to work together. Because often what happens is you may have a very good social system, but it doesn't know how to work very well with the criminal system, or vice versa. So what we need to do is work around those borders, those edges, and make sure that the whole system works together. That's my sort of vision for this, is a really, really strong board that, as we're going through the discussions on the tour for that, will likely, at least at the beginning, report directly to me, because I would be the responsible person who would be above any particular interest of the of a department and so on, and who could perhaps, at least as we get started, set the tone for a really robust approach to having the agencies that need to work together. And by the way, these agencies aren't all government agencies. There are agencies in that are non-government agencies that are also involved in that system. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. I just wanted.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch a little bit on the legislation. I know some time ago you would have spoken about some assistance to beef up that legislation side. Is there any progress?
Yes, that's been provided. There's been quite a lot of assistance. For example, UNICEF has been very, very instrumental in helping that. There's a whole regional kind of approach to this, so it's been informed by the regional approach. And the Child Safeguarding Unit of the FCO in London has also provided a lot of advice and support, and will continue to do so around the setting up of the board and so on. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert in law, but to me it looks like a fairly sound piece of legislation. Perhaps needs a few tweaks and before it's finalized.
Governor, you mentioned briefly the lack of capacity in the social division. There are about 5 or 6 government employees that I know of that are currently studying social work. Why aren't they being taken over into that area to at least offer some support, and they could get on-the-job training?
Yeah. Well, again, this is not, I'm not operational, so I can't answer the operational questions. I know that whole thing has come up about what we do with the people that are training, what kind of training they're undertaking, and what kind of expertise. So I know that the whole package is looking at, being able to capacitate the social service division. But in the meantime, there's this sort of surge capacity to sort of kickstart our ability to deal with these cases until we have that capacity built in.
Because just to add, because I think there is also a sense of frustration that they're not being used, because clearly it's their desire to be supporting this work.
There are protocols around qualifications and in social workers. So you should probably ask the director that question rather than me. Yeah.
The director of where?
Social services.
Yeah.
Yes. One of the words used throughout today's thing, mindset. And Your Excellency, I guess that's I don't know. How are you dealing with that? It all comes back to the whole thing of building the capacity and so on and so on and so on. But that mindset thing, because if that's not changed, if nothing is done about it, we can do all what we want, and we can bring all the expertise and this and that in.
Yeah.
The Lucy Fade Foundation, which has been guiding to some extent what we've been doing regarding child safeguarding and so on, did not include the creation of a unit, an independent unit within Wherever. But again, it will incorporate pretty much all of those things. And I thought there was an illusion. In fact, even the police, I understand, they told me that they are asking for this to happen. Is anything happening with that?
There is, as far as I understand it, a unit being established, yes. They're just doing the recruitment and staffing up of that unit. Yeah. But again, you should talk to the operational people about where they are with that plan.
Okay. Public Administration Act, is that in force yet?
Sorry?
Since 2012, I think, the Public Administration Act. In other words, has it replaced the general orders yet? I was someplace.
Okay.
Well, maybe I shouldn't say that.
Oh, this is a continuous issue, and I have just tried to again stimulate this. The Public Administration Act is passed. It was passed several years ago, as you note. I think it was thought that it would be quite a quick thing to develop regulations for it that would give, power to the Act. that has proven not to be a quick win. Let me put it that way. And it's still not there. So I have specifically asked that we find resources and quickly get on that and just get the regulations developed. And that once the regulations are developed, I have to say that there's so many times where I say, remember, I think in my Christmas message, I said, when people tell me we can't do that, I always want to say, why not? But there are so many answers to that question that end up, well, we don't have the regulations to the Public Service Act yet. So we need those regulations, and we need to get on with it, because there's actually some draft regulations. I can't make a judgment of how good they are, but they've been around for a while. And there's also some plans to change general orders, to update general orders according to that. So you've struck a nerve there, Bennett, and I am very much pushing for us to resolve that quickly, because it is one of those bottlenecks, and it's one of those why not questions that I would very much like answered.
Procurement. Where are we on that, the change and the development of that?
Well, as you know, we have our head of procurement here, Mr. Gareth Spencer, who's been in post now since October. He's been very much sort of concentrating or been trying to sort out some of these sort of operational difficulties within procurement, within departments, and also centrally. But he's going to be working over the next few months on the standard operating procedures and the policy work, and then the training of officials, and also the legislation will need to go through Cabinet for the change of procurement rules. So that's what he's focused on for the next few months. So,
is he running into any roadblocks, Martin?
I think no. I think the challenge is he's essentially only one person, so we've recognised that. So we're trying to now work with him and the Ministry of Finance and also DFID to see what else we can do to help resource the work that he's got to do, because we know it is a lot for one person to handle.
Yeah. I was expecting an hour and a half, Tony.
That was
if
because
the Premier was here.
the Premier was. We were going to do a joint.
Turned out that. We're doing well without it, aren't we? Anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to your last question, and maybe you've already answered it,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember in January, you or was it December, you said you'd given HR 90 days to give you a status report. Have you received that report?
I don't remember that I asked them for giving them 90 days for a status report.
Well, it was about how you were going to process and fast track.
What I'd asked for, I think, was a way of ensuring that a 90-day was a standard for recruitment from start to finish. And there has been work done on that, and there has been a solution. In fact, I was pleased to note in some of the correspondence that I've seen coming up, on HR issues and so on, that people are now beginning to refer to a 90-day recruitment cycle as though it's an accepted thing. So, 90 days seems like a long time, but it's really, really important to have a standard and to have looked at the whole system and seen where the bottlenecks might be. And I guess the next step for me is to say, okay, we've got this standard. How's it working? How are we managing to achieve that? Yeah.
In response to the disaster, you mentioned earlier that if there had been a tsunami generated from the earthquake on Saturday, there would have been a 30-minute response time. Are we satisfied that the populace is properly prepared to deal with, let's say, tsunamis? Is there in place, okay, for instance, are the sirens working? What would we expect if something was supposed to happen and have happened on Saturday, or even yesterday, because there was another earthquake yesterday, I understood?
I'll take that one.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Just to answer a short answer to the question about the sirens. Yes, they are working. They're tested every weekday at 12 o'clock, so I think most people hear them. There was something that we discussed at the pre-exercise workshop tabletop last Wednesday was what can you do and how do you notify people, especially when you've only got a short notice period. With the exercise last week that we were working on was an hour and 3/4 notice period rather than 15 or 20 minutes. I mean, obviously the main thing, anybody in low-lying areas and the areas around the beaches and Cars Bay and Little Bays, move higher. Beyond that, depending on how much time you've got, there are other things you can do. But the main notification processes will be the siren system and the messaging facility that goes with it. Those who have via radios on ZJB, and as much as can be done in the areas that are identified as vulnerable, so the low-lying areas, to get people out and up to higher ground. Let's say, for instance, the earthquake at the weekend had generated a 5-meter tsunami, not beyond, that's sort of picking a figure out of the air. You can roughly model how far inland that size of wave can go. The exercise we were working to last week was a 10-meter tsunami, and what we thought that everybody thinks about a tsunami as being a wave similar to the ones that come ashore on the routine tides. What you forget about is the force of the water that's behind it, because something's happened to the seabed to force that amount of water to produce the wave. So it's not just a question of the wave coming in and going out, it comes in, and anybody who remembers the Japanese tsunami in 2011 will see that tsunami just kept on going. It didn't just flow in and flow back out, it kept on going and went miles and miles inland. Now we're fortunate in Montserrat, because of the topography, that there are relatively few vulnerable areas, so the main target would be to get people out. Safety of life is first, safety of property is second.